back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Hodl with Hedl, a chance to zoom out for a moment and take a wider perspective of some of the heady issues dominating the crypto markets as a whole. And to guide us on this journey of discovery, we're joined by Bitcoin influencer and thought leader Dan Held, co-founder of asset management firm Interchange. Dan, pleasure to see you again.
Always great to see you as well.
All right, so just to kick things off now, I know you want to talk about the impact of the Deutsche Bank restructuring, firing almost 20,000 workers. That's 1/5 of their workforce. Now, many are saying that this is a sign of things to come, but the first domino among many, all kicked off by Satoshi's vision and the Bitcoin world as a whole. What's your takeaway from this?
Yeah, so Deutsche Bank, this was a really interesting development as Deutsche Bank was kind of struggling over the last few years. But to see such drastic measures, to see them cut such a huge percentage of their workforce, to see them set up a bad bank. I mean, we haven't heard that term used since the financial crisis. Setting up a bad bank to absorb toxic assets or to quarantine toxic assets. So I think this is symptomatic of sort of the top of the market, where we're seeing, a large investment bank have issues, even though the market's doing fine. I think that's a really worrying sign. Now, for Bitcoin hodlers, it's not necessarily a big worry because Bitcoin was built for situations like this. But it is certainly interesting to see this happen, especially in a bull market, versus we haven't really heard about any sort of bad macroeconomic issues that would have caused Deutsche Bank to have these sort of problems. So, it's weird because it's been almost 10 years since the financial crisis, and I think a lot of us forgot what that feeling was like. The issues with the banks that, originally why Satoshi built Bitcoin. He, launched Bitcoin or planted Bitcoin in 2008, specifically October 31st, 2008, which is at the peak of the financial crisis. Bitcoin was purpose-built to be an antidote to bad central banking policy. And that's why Satoshi, in his first message on the Bitcoin blockchain, says he writes in UK Chancellor on the verge of second bailout for banks. So I think, we should go back to our roots and remember why Bitcoin was built. And I think it's moments like these, which sometimes take a very long time to come to fruition. It's moments like these that we can reflect and go, okay, now, what if I didn't have to trust Deutsche Bank anymore and I just had to trust myself? And so that's what Bitcoin was made for.
I mean, it's interesting when we talk about this because obviously this is a point where Bitcoin and crypto markets as a whole really show their youth, their lack of testing in the long term. Because the fact of the matter is, while you're right that Bitcoin was created during the peak and in the wake of a global financial crisis, it hasn't really been tested again in a new crisis, certainly not on the global scale. There have been, whether we're talking about the Euro crisis in the early 2010s or various small impacts that have come into play and certainly have been cited as driving users towards cryptocurrencies, at least in niche markets. We haven't had that large-scale test yet. Do you think that the Deutsche Bank move is an emblematic sign that the market is in the right place? And do you think if it is tested on that larger scale, if we see a big pullback in global markets, do you think Bitcoin is really in the position it needs to be in to become that global safe haven that so many want it to be?
That's a great question. And I think if it happened right now, Bitcoin isn't ready for it just yet. But we do see inklings that the narrative of Bitcoin being a safe haven trade or a risk-off trade, we're starting to see that permeate the consciousness of institutional banking or institutions and investment banking. Travis Kling, myself, and others, and Pompliano, we have all been kind of talking about this event happening, and now we're starting to see it reflected by, I think, like Invesco. One of their economists was interviewed last week, and she said, there's rumors throughout the analysts in the space that Bitcoin is becoming the safe haven asset. And I thought that would take a lot longer to have that narrative really permeate into the old mainstream financial world, but it sounds like Bitcoin is starting to become that already. And so, I think the stage has been set. We've got some worrisome macroeconomic environments. We've got really good institutional pipes plugged in for Bitcoin. So when people perceive Bitcoin as the safe haven asset. They're able to access Bitcoin in a proper manner. For example, hedge funds having the appropriate level of regulations and liquidity for them to enter and exit positions. I think all of that has been set. All we need is the narrative to be believed in. So I think that's going to take a few more years, but I don't think we're going to see some really serious macroeconomic issues until 2020 or 2021. So that might be really serendipitous, where the halving event for Bitcoin happens, Bitcoin enters another bull market cycle. We see a lot of fears in the mainstream financial world, and it's sort of a perfect storm, if you will.
I mean, obviously, a best case scenario you're talking about there could be possible, but I suppose I've got to wonder as well, on the flip side of that, there are those who are still concerned that, certainly in mainstream markets and in those institutional investors, that Bitcoin is still a speculative asset first and foremost, and that particularly for institutional players, they see it as maybe a hedge, but more as a gamble in their portfolio. Do you think that that categorization and that profiling of Bitcoin in that manner risks limiting its potential reach should it be needed for safe haven purposes? Should there be a larger fall in bigger markets?
Yeah, definitely right now, Bitcoin is still considered a speculative or risk-on asset, to where people buy it when they feel super, super risky. And that's why the narrative needs to spend a few years permeating into the consciousness of the legacy existing financial system. So it's a long process. It doesn't happen instantly. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think certainly right now, Bitcoin is more of that risk-on trade, but we're starting to see it become, the narrative become the risk-off trade, which is really, really cool. I'll also note that Barclays recently issued a internal report that was shared in the crypto community, where they mentioned that Bitcoin is becoming like a gold 2.0. So we are seeing that across multiple types of different institutional investors. And so I think this is really important. We're starting to see, these aren't Bitcoiners advocating that Bitcoin is the safe haven asset. These are legacy players saying that Bitcoin might be a safe haven asset. So I think we're well along that track. And if this narrative continues to snowball, I definitely think we'll see that be in the right place the next few years. But who knows, it may take a lot longer than that as well.
And certainly, you'll have to see how it goes in terms of time. But I want to switch now the conversation, moving a little away from the institutional players, Deutsche Bank and those like it, and moving more towards the personalities. Now, it's something that we are all quite aware of in the crypto sphere. Personalities do play a big role, but essentially, and at the end of the day, it is ideally Bitcoin. It's a decentralized system, and those players, while they might make a lot of noise, aren't inherent to the physical structures of the system. Now, obviously, this isn't the place in the mainstream market, and we've seen an interesting case of that playing out in the headlines at the moment with the Jeffrey Epstein case. Now, I know you've got some interesting things to say about that. What are your thoughts on how this case of Jeffrey Epstein, for those who don't remember, being charged with a number of sexual misconduct issues, potentially even underage, women prostitution, a range of affairs coming out, and potentially having a political and perhaps a financial fallout? What are your sort of thoughts about this in regards to the mainstream market and also potential impacts in the crypto sphere?
Yeah, so I think I'm one of the rare few people who have examined this case from an economic and political perspective. Well, not necessarily. I think a lot of people viewed it from a political perspective, but an economic perspective as well. So the Epstein case is essentially around this individual who supposedly facilitated underage sexual sort of activities with other very wealthy, influential people. Now, at first glance, it just seems like a run-of-the-mill, a terrible case, but a run-of-the-mill sort of exploitation case. However, when we dig in and we look at who was involved, it's extremely troubling to look at who was involved with this, which includes like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Charlie Rose, Jimmy Buffett, Alec Baldwin, Prince Andrew, and many, many others. And so I don't think a lot of people, and I don't think the markets have really thought about the implications of this. If this is all proven true, and Epstein, by the way, has already agreed to a plea deal, which means he'll be confirming individuals who engaged in this behavior, especially these very highly prominent individuals. This could have a lot of political fallout in terms of making people distrust their existing leadership, whether it be in the financial system, the government, or in companies. And so I think this comes at a really critical time where a lot of people have anxieties and fears over their leadership in this country. And this could be the tipping point, or this could be the point where that kind of shatters it. If a child sex ring is amongst the top leadership, if it's found out there's this wide swath of our leaders who've engaged in this behavior, it's so morally repugnant that I'm not sure if the existing system can really absorb that sort of negativity and still maintain its legitimacy.
So is this where you think, I mean, bringing this back to Bitcoin then, do you think this is Bitcoin potentially serving its role, waiting there as the market disruptor, waiting perhaps in the shadows as the market disruptor, ready to come out should there be this lack of faith, lack of trust in the establishment system? I mean, is that the sort of underlying message you're getting to here?
Absolutely, and that's what's so great about Bitcoin is that with Bitcoin we don't have to trust in people, we trust in mathematics. And furthermore, Satoshi realized that every human has flaws and that he should remove himself from power and also stay pseudonymous while he created Bitcoin, just in case one of those flaws of his was ever exploited or surfaced. So Bitcoin was purpose built to remove the humans, or remove the human face on something, or the human face on an economy. And so it's moments like these that show, hey, wait a second, what if in mass we lose faith in the leaders of our system? Bitcoin purpose built to go, hey, you don't have to trust anyone. Here's just trusting mathematics. And that's what makes it so beautiful. And it's moments like these that take a long time to happen. And then when they do happen, it reminds you of why we're all here.
I suppose I have to ask as well, when we look at the cryptosphere as it stands at the moment, the fact of the matter is that the vision of an idea of Satoshi, besides, there are a lot of big egos rattling around the space and a lot of big players that certainly get a lot of airtime and take up a lot of the oxygen that exists within the space. And I suppose I wonder what you would say about those people. Is that a dilution of the ideal system, or is that just the reality of human nature, that people are going to tend towards a particular leader, a cult of personality, as it will? And I'm talking here ranging from CZ to Craig Wright to any of the players that people get behind, the camping and the segregation of ideas. Is this an inevitable part of the system, or do you think we can bring it back to that sort of pure mathematical vision?
Well, I think humans are humans by human nature. So, for us, we were born in this physical world, and we have to have connections with individuals that we trust. So it's totally natural that we would gravitate towards certain leaders that exhibit certain sort of characteristics that we look for as trustworthy. And so it's only natural that it is extended to Bitcoin. In Bitcoin in the crypto space. Fortunately, in Bitcoin in the crypto space, a lot of people, like especially in the Bitcoin community, we see don't trust, verify being a core theme. So while we do have leaders, I think, especially amongst Bitcoiners, there's a lot of skepticism around people's motives, what people say, because Bitcoiners have been burnt before. Bitcoiners inherently don't trust individuals. They don't trust, they verify. So I think, yeah, of course, they're going to have different people that they really respect, really admire because of how they talk or how they explain certain things or how they act. But ultimately, it's around, what ideas do they have and how do they convey those ideas? And that's where I think a lot of people gravitate towards those who are best at storytelling, those who are best at building. CZ is a great example for building. Binance is the #1 exchange in the world. Or it might be, Anthony Pompliano, who's really, really good at coming up with positive narratives or positive memes for crypto. So, I think it's people gravitating towards what is natural, which is believing in something or believing in someone that they can really look at and aspire to, or look at and use whatever they've conveyed, whether that be a story or a product, and it impacts their life, and so that means a lot to them.
Do you think there's nuance risk being lost with the sort of increased adoption that we're seeing, though? I mean, speaking about those that already exist within the Bitcoin space, certainly, I guess they understand the history, they understand what Bitcoin was built for, why it was launched. But for those entering the space now, relatively recently, or even into the future, who don't necessarily understand the history and intent that comes with it, do you think that risks diluting this awareness, this sort of cultural attitude? And do you think that will result in us abandoning the verify sort of system, or you'll have a bit of a split tier sort of situation where you have the old Bitcoiners and the old guard sticking to those principles while a new round of speculators just comes in for making quick cash and not thinking about those higher level issues?
Well, that's a great question. And I think throughout every single market cycle for Bitcoin, or every single boom bust cycle, we've seen people come for the degenerate trading and then stay for the sound money. So I think a vast majority of people who ever buy Bitcoin are doing it in a speculative manner, but some percentage of them stick around in the bear market and choose to go read more around Austrian economics and choose to really dig in deep. And those are the hodlers that are left at the end of the bear market. And so, yes, there'll be people that just come for the speculative bubble, but those hodlers or those believers are the ones who choose to dig in. I think those, are the kind of core cultural component of Bitcoin. Now, throughout history, stories were the binding glue between social groups. Before we could really read and write, we had stories passed down verbally from generation to generation. And so in order to do that in the cryptocurrency space, or in order to do that in a succinct manner, you have to have a succinct story. And I think Bitcoin's story is very succinct. Bitcoin's story around being Gold 2.0 is very understandable. And so I see that narrative being propagated pretty well, even post kind of the core small knit group of Bitcoiners. I think that narrative can still be permeated and still be propagated into bigger and bigger groups, whereas I think the narrative for other cryptocurrencies becomes a little complex. I'm not sure if I can explain what a world computer means to my mom, but she certainly wears a gold watch, and so she can understand the value of that.
All right, well, it certainly is a matter of values, I suppose, when you come down to it. And lastly, though, before I let you go, I've got to ask, in the last 24 hours, we saw double-digit increases in Bitcoin, bit of a pullback since then, but still definitely some increased volatility. We saw Bitcoin climb all the way up to 64% of total market value. Anything you can read from that as a long-time player in the space? Do you find this volatility unnerving, potential manipulation in the market, or do you think that this is some healthy market growth and development?
Well, it's always tough to know if something is market manipulation versus organic. Arguably, anytime you buy or sell a crypto asset, you're moving the market. So manipulation would indicate that you're moving an oversized position that is not necessarily looking for price discovery. So, long story short, I think this is largely driven by institutional volume, which is very legitimate and very real. We can look at CME volume in order to verify this. And so this is a huge step forward where we're starting to see the markets, or the Bitcoin market itself in singular form, be driven by institutional trading volume, which is really, really huge. In terms of how I've seen this space over the last 7 years and what we're looking at now, the fact that institutions can even buy Bitcoin is amazing. The amount of exchanges out there is incredible, and that the trading volume is super high. So I couldn't be more excited to see how Bitcoin trades in this next bull run. We're certainly seeing a bull run happen a lot faster, I think, than anyone else expected. I'm in a few different analyst trader chats, and very few of them predicted this. And so I think this is really exciting because it's showing that people are looking towards the future like the halving event and starting to buy ahead of that, or starting to buy ahead of other macro environments, because they're really seeing the potential of Bitcoin. So I think this is a really exciting spot for Bitcoin. I'm not sure if we stay above it, but I think we break our all-time highs this year. So I think we break 20,000 by the end of 2019.
All right, Dan Held with a very firm prediction in the future of Bitcoin. We're all headed up from here. Interesting to see how it plays out. I want to thank you so much, Dan, for helping us to hodl with HEDL and find out a little bit more about the space and what drives it. So thanks so much for being with us, Dan. And of course, stay with us at BLOCKTV.com for all the latest news and information, but also for the wider picture and a bit of a look back at what the industry was, is, and will be. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.